Aloha. I have my Bible open up to the Gospel of John, chapter 21. And again, the question to be asking is a very simple question. Is there a word from the Word that can just give us a sense of some courage and hope as we continue on this journey together? Because I tell you what, my friends, if we thought a couple of months ago life was very uncertain and that the future was really quite uncharted, I don't think that's changed a whole lot, quite honestly. You see a lot of change still taking place in our country, in our communities, in our families, in our homes. Certainly here in Hawaii, our churches, our schools, our camp, conference office, there's just so much going on. Still so much uncertainty. So I think it's appropriate to ask the question, is there a word from the Word that can give us a sense of courage, give us a sense of hope, a reason for eager anticipation for the future? So again, as I mentioned, my Bible's open to the Gospel of John, chapter 21, because embedded in this chapter, which, by the way, it's the last chapter in the Gospel of John, but embedded in this chapter is just a short little vignette that happens to be just one of my all-time favorites. In fact, I would suggest to you that if there was a YouTube clip of this particular scene, I would be playing that clip over and over and over again. It's just that special. It's just that significant. So listen, before I get to that YouTube clip, I think it's important to give a little bit of a background, just a little short context, so it helps us appreciate a little bit more as to the significance of that moment that we're going to live together. So the Gospel of John, so the context is, so this is the last chapter. So the context is that Calvary has taken place, the resurrection has taken place, the disciples are still just quite discouraged, quite despondent over what is taking place. I mean, Jesus dies on the cross, the tomb is empty, what in the world is going on? So in the opening salvo, the first couple of verses of John's Gospel, of chapter 21, there's a description of, so this story takes place with 7 of the disciples. And it names most of them in the story. So we know that Peter is there, Thomas, Nathaniel, James, and John, and then we're told there's 2 other disciples, but we're not given their names. So they're in this region of Galilee, and Peter, of course, comes up with a great idea. It's kind of in the context of, hey, listen, guys, I'm not going to just sit around here and mope. I'm going to go out fishing. And the 6 others say, hey, listen, we're going to come with you. So they launch out onto to the Lake of Galilee. Now, one of the reasons why I think this story is so special for me, and the reason why I just love to replay it over and over in my mind, is because I've had the privilege of traveling to Israel, into the area of Galilee, and have actually been on the very spot where they say this story actually took place. And it just so happened to be the springtime. It was in March when we were there, which is the same period of time, seasonally at least, as to when the story would take place. And I remember that our tour guide said, hey, listen, we're going to get an early start, and this is going to be the first place we stop, because this will give you an idea of what the environment was like, what the experience was like there on the shores of Galilee. And look, I just remembered, it was kind of chilly, it was a little cold, I had a windbreaker on, and as we were standing there as a group, huddled together on the pebble shores of the Sea of Galilee, this beautiful lake, pristine. It was a beautiful, crisp, cool morning. I put my hand in the lake. I'm telling you what, I would not be so inclined to jump in and swim around. It was kind of cool. So here the 7 disciples are. They're on the lake. They've been fishing all night long. And the morning light is just, that sun's beginning to just kind of glow. And a man from the shore begins to shout, talk out loud. Hey, listen, guys, have you caught anything? And you know how it is, how sound travels across the water. I mean, you can just hear as clear as can be. And of course the answer is, hey, no, we haven't caught a thing. And then he says, well, listen, why don't you just try casting your net on the other side? And I think that must have been That must have been the trigger point for John, little John boy. He was the youngest of them, of the disciples. And immediately he turns and he looks at Peter and he says, Pete, I think that's Jesus. I think that's the Lord. And without even giving it a second thought, I mean, you know how impulsive Peter is. The next thing you know, the guy's just, he dives overboard and starts swimming to shore. He probably gets there right about the time that the rest of them arrive. And when they pull up onto the shore, Jesus already has a fire going. He's got some biscuits baking. He says, hey, listen, guys, give me some fish. Next thing you know, he's got the fish there on the fire. And see, here's the intriguing thing about the story, is that they know it's Jesus, but they're tongue-tied because they can't believe it. I mean, they just can't believe that they're having breakfast with Jesus. The one who is dead is now alive, and they're actually eating breakfast with him. So this takes us to the little vignette. This is the part of the story I wanted to draw your attention to. This is the part that gives me chicken skin every time I read it. So it's in verse 12 here. And so Jesus turns and says to them, so these would be the 7 disciples. They're huddled, squatting around that fire. Hands are out, trying to stay warm. And Jesus says to them, come and eat breakfast. Push the pause button. I want just reflect on that for just a moment. Can you imagine what it would be like personally to be in the presence of Jesus, and he looks you in the eyes and says, hey, listen, come, let's have breakfast together. Let's have breakfast together. And of course, these guys can hardly believe their minds are just swirling, because listen to what it says next. Yet none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Knowing that it was Jesus, knowing that it was the Lord. And so then Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and likewise the fish. Hey, listen, I'll confess to you that if I had been there, if I was the 8th disciple there that morning having breakfast with Jesus, I would have been tongue-tied too. I mean, this is, by and large, these are just young guys, very impressionable. And they realize that they are now actually physically eating breakfast with a man who was dead and is now alive. They are eating breakfast with a man who was dead and is now alive. And they can hardly believe it. They can't even say anything. They know, we know that's Jesus, but we can't say anything. It's just overwhelming. The realization they are literally eating breakfast with a man who is dead and is now alive. You know, I sometimes have wondered, because obviously I love this story, and so I reflect on it from time to time, but I do find myself wondering that as these 7 continued a journey in life, and of course you can read the stories in the New Testament. I mean, you can just even read through Acts of the Apostles. And it's like all 7 of these disciples, I mean, they faced huge crises in their lives, massive obstacles, gut-wrenching tribulations. But you know, I've come to the conclusion that when they found themselves in the middle of these uncertainties and of these crises, where there was maybe a sense of just anxiety or fear or worry that just begin to well up into their hearts and just grip their minds, I wonder if at that moment their minds wandered back to that morning on the shores of Galilee, when they were literally physically having breakfast with the man who had been dead and is now alive. And I wonder if that memory just triggered a realization along the lines of, wait a minute, don't you think the man who is dead and is now alive, don't you think that he can deal with and handle anything that I might be going through in life? And I wonder if for those 7 disciples, as their minds would go back and recall that memory, that it just gave him a sense of real boldness and courage. Just being reminded that they had had breakfast with a man who had been dead and is now alive. And don't you think he can do something? Don't you think that he can handle whatever it is that they were going through? Which then gives me a sense of urgency to look you in the eye right now and ask the same question. If you have had breakfast with a man who was dead and is now alive, what is it in your life right now that would cause you to worry or to be fearful or to be afraid or to be full of anxiety? If you've had breakfast with a man who is dead and is now alive forevermore, what in the world is it in your life to be afraid of, to be fearful of? Because don't you think the man who was dead and is now alive forevermore, don't you think he can deal with it? Whatever it is that you're facing? And you see, to me, that this little vignette, this little cameo of Jesus and the disciples, I think it's more applicable to us now than it's probably has ever been before. I mean, just as you look at the headlines of where we are in this planet, where nobody seems to really have a clear-cut, concise answer to the crises that we are experiencing. I mean, just one after another, they just keep coming. And the human tendency, of course, is that there's just this, because of the uncertainty, to just beginning to well up into our own little hearts and our minds is just this sense of anxiety and worry, fear, because we don't know. We just don't know. But could it be like the disciples? Our minds can just flash back to that moment on Galilee, having breakfast with Jesus, who was dead, but is now alive forevermore. Don't you think that he can deal with it, whatever it is that you and I might be facing or going through? So listen, my friend, I'm just standing here looking at an iPad. I'm just standing here with my Bible right over and just sharing another little biblical story here with you. But I'm convinced, my heart is convicted, that out of this little story is just a reminder for you and for me. Hey, look, we can have breakfast with Jesus. Listen, this just doesn't have to be a story relegated to far away and long ago. No. I mean, the application is here for you and for me today. You and I, every single morning, can have breakfast with the same one, the one who is dead and who is now alive forevermore. Breakfast with Jesus. And then when we faced, like those 7 disciples, whatever the crisis or whatever the issues that they happen to be facing in their lives, they can go back and to remember, you know what? Don't you think the man who is dead and now who is alive forevermore, he's got this. He can handle it. He'll see me through. So let me leave you with this. So I love these songs that we don't sing them too much anymore, but they're still great little songs. I'm thinking about the song that goes like this: "This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through." I don't hear that song too much anymore, but I love it. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. But what I like is the story of a little boy who heard this song for the very first time, and he got it almost perfectly, 100%, but there was one word that he missed. And the way that he sang it, it went like this: "This world is not my hope. I'm just a passing through." You know, I think in many respects, I like the way that he sings it better, because it's just so true. This world is not my hope. It is not my hope. I'm only passing through. And as I'm passing through on this journey together with you on this pathway to a place called paradise, as we journey together, we can do so with the realization that whatever it is that you and I may face on this journey, that we can reflect back on having breakfast with Jesus and be reminded that whatever it is that we are facing, the one who is dead and is now alive forevermore, he's got it. He's got it. So listen, may this just bring you a sense of courage, and may it bring you a sense of hope as we continue on this journey together.